Welcome to Brave Together Parenting, an empowering and truly helpful podcast for the parents of children with disabilities and all unique needs.
Once you're past that immediate need for survival, which there was a good season of that for me, but once you're out of that, take time to feel, to process, to cry, to mourn, to acknowledge, to do some good breathing techniques, and then keep going.
Hello, Brave friends. I'm your host for this story episode. It's Jessica Pate here, Brave mom and the founder of the nonprofit We Are Brave Together. This is story episode 197, in which we hear a true story from a moment in the life of a caregiving parent. Following the story, we have a conversation with our storyteller that goes deeper into their experience. Today, we're going to hear a story from Abby Zachritz, who shares her harrowing journey following a near-fatal pool accident involving her young son, Wyatt. The discussion covers the emotional and medical challenges faced by Abby and her family, the miraculous recovery of Wyatt, and the profound impact of the experience on their lives. A reminder here to subscribe to our podcast, leave us a review, share our podcast with friends, and follow us on Instagram. And if you want to see the faces behind this podcast, look for all our episodes this season on YouTube. We thank you in advance for your support. I'll let Abby take it from here.
After my son Wyatt's near drowning, our lives shifted in ways I could never have imagined. One day he was my active, adventurous little boy, and the next we were in this world of hospital specialists and completely new reality. It felt like everything changed overnight, and yet for so long I couldn't grasp the fullness of what had happened. I kept thinking that Wyatt would snap out of it like you see in the movies, that he would wake up one day and life would go back to what it was. It didn't occur to me that his brain injury and the world of complex medical care were now permanently parts of our story. In those early days, I felt lost, completely overwhelmed by a new language of medical jargon, the medications, and the constant appointments. We had no family history of any kind of diagnosis, no roadmap to follow. I wasn't ready to fully face the new reality, so I did what I had to do to keep going. For years, I pushed aside my feelings. I focused on building systems, organizing medications, making a schedule, surrounding Wyatt with the best experts and therapists we could find. We lived in survival mode, and while it wasn't sustainable, it was all I could do at the time. It took nearly a decade before I began to truly process the emotional weight of what had happened. I remember a turning point in therapy when my counselor pointed out a habit I didn't even know I had. When emotions would start to bubble up, I'd physically shake my head no and swipe my hand to the side as if I could push the thought away. For so long, I couldn't let myself feel the depth of the sadness and loss. But through EMDR therapy and lots of prayer, I started to understand that the only way to heal was to let myself sit with the pain, to feel it, acknowledge it, and integrate it into my story. Allowing myself to do that has made a world of difference. It's not that the pain has disappeared, it still hurts, and there are days when the sadness is overwhelming. But now, when I'm in a safe place like home or surrounded by my supportive group of friends and family, I let those emotions come. I allow myself to feel the weight of it all, knowing that it's part of the healing process. By facing those feelings, I've learned to respond to my life from a place of rest rather than being stuck in a constant state of fight or flight. One of the hardest parts of those early years was finding a balance between caring for Wyatt and still being present for my 4 other children. I wanted so badly to feel normal again, to have conversations with friends that weren't just about medical care or appointments. I'd sometimes share my dreams, hopes, and frustrations with my friends, but I'd always stay positive because it felt like the only way to cope. It wasn't that I wasn't feeling the weight of everything, I just didn't have the capacity to fully process it back then. And sometimes I just wanted to be myself and not to be the mom with the medically complex child. It wasn't until we finally got full-time nursing support nearly 10 years post-injury that I could even start to breathe again. Having the right team around Wyatt, as well as a community of friends who accepted me for who I was, gave me the space to start focusing on my own healing. Slowly, I learned that processing the trauma didn't make me weak. It made me stronger, more resilient, and better equipped to support my whole family. If there's one message I would want to share with other fellow caregiver parents, it's this. Give yourself permission to feel, even if it's messy and painful. The systems and routines you put in place for survival are crucial, but don't forget to care for yourself too. Find those moments where you can sit with your feelings and lean on the people around you who offer support. It's a long road, but you don't have to walk it alone. I've learned that healing is a journey, not a destination, and every small step towards acknowledging your own needs is a step towards finding peace.
Yes, I love that she says, healing is a journey, not a destination. We have to give ourselves time and space to process not only what we've been through, but what we're currently living through. I have to say, this conversation is an emotional one, as Abby generously takes us through the traumatic day of her son's accident. But it's also cathartic as we move into her healing journey and very important advocacy work. She has so much insight to share, and I learned so much from her. Please enjoy my conversation with the tender warrior mama, Abby Zachritz. Hi, Abby. We've talked about this for a while, and I'm so excited that you're here today.
I'm so excited to be here. I know it's been a long time coming.
And while I know it can be energizing to just have these conversations and to share our stories, going back in time can also be, can push those buttons. So I just want to say thank you for being willing to go back there and to share your story. And I so admire you and admire the work that you're doing. I love my fellow movers and shakers in the disability world and medical complex world of parenting, or altered parenting, I call it. And I'm just really appreciative that I have somebody to point, others to, because I get asked so many questions about resources and I don't have all the answers. And you've got some great resources that you put together. I know we'll get to that. But let's start by just having you share a little of your story and take us back to the ages of your kids. Where were you in life when the accident happened with Wyatt?
Yeah, so it was 2014. We had just moved from Fort Myers, or Cape Coral area, Florida, which is Southwest Florida, to a colder part of the state, which is Gainesville, North Florida. My husband was a church plant pastor at the time. We planted a church, and we had just started that journey, launched in December, and it was April, and still a little bit cold at that point. I had had 4 kids, and I was pregnant with my 5th. Wyatt was 18 months. I was a little under 7 months pregnant with Luke, my 5th surprise. And I had a first grader, a pre-K kiddo, which is Ford, and Jude, who was in diapers at the time, so about 2.5, almost 3. And Wyatt was my feisty 18-month-old, and we had gotten into this house that had a pool. It was the first time we've had a pool in our house. And just to give a little background, and I like to tell people this because I want people to know that it can happen to anyone. I was a swim instructor. I had taught all my children how to swim by 15 months. I have videos of me throwing Jude into the pool, and he's like throwing him as far as I could and him swimming to the side. But we had just moved to Gainesville and it was colder. And so that kept us from getting into the pool as early as we had in the past. I mean, in Southwest Florida, you can be in the pool on Christmas Day. So we had just told the landlord how something had broken, and Wyatt, always being curious, always being feisty and a fighter and doing what he wants, somehow was able to get out past the fence, past a gate, and fell into our pool. We were preparing for my son's VPK recital. And I had asked, where, because Wyatt was cleaning up blocks. Matter of fact, I remember very vividly that the 4-year-old Ford was like, "Mom, he keeps pulling him back out after I clean him up." He was getting so upset. And quickly just was like, "Hey, where's Wyatt?" And my husband had just got back from running to the store. He's like, "Where is he?" And I'm like, he was just in the living room. And so we looked around and found him in the pool and, sprung into action. My husband jumped in. I began CPR, called 911. We were soaking wet. I jumped in the ambulance with him. And I remember I kept looking, I was in the front seat with the driver and I kept telling him to speed, to go faster. And I kept looking back and they were still working. And I remember they looked frantic and they'd look up and see me sometimes. And what I didn't know at the time was he had had a dry drowning. It's where your vocal cords actually spasm shut. So no water got into his lungs, which was a praise because he was up at the top. So we saw him quickly, but he had no air going through either. And so they were unable to intubate him. So this whole time he's without oxygen. They were trying desperately to get past his vocal cords. So went to the hospital. They, are doing their thing, trying their best emergently to resuscitate him. I was in the waiting room because that's where they keep frantic family members, by myself because I got there with him. My husband was following behind because we had 3 other kids and he had to make sure they were safe. He had to wait till somebody could come to take care of them so he could go. And which was seconds. I mean, it was probably 2 or 3 minutes behind me. I was on my face crying out to God to save my son. And the nurse came in and said, he's not doing well. He's not going to make it. And I fell and I started screaming and crying. And she said, if you don't pull it together, you're not going in to see your son. And I just remember immediately standing up and being like, nothing's going to stop me from seeing my son. So my understanding was I was coming in to say goodbye to him. And the process is the doctor, I guess, and this might be common practice or just the practice there. The doctor had said, keep doing chest compressions. And when mom comes in, stop, because it allows your brain to kind of gather that they are done. So there was like 15 people in the room, but there was one person doing chest compressions, I think an EMT. And he stopped when I walked in and I began to scream, don't stop, and just beg Jesus to save my son. I was screaming and crying. And Dr. Bunalai, who is at the time, the longest running intensivist, so specializes in the lungs. This is what he does all day, every day, had already used, I don't know if it's called echo or EKG, but it's where they put the gel on your chest to look at your heart just to make sure there was no beat. He had already done that. And this is about 40 minutes at this point in time.
Okay.
And he said, show mom his heart. And I now understand that he was trying to get me to come to terms that he's gone. But I remember he put it on his heart and I looked at the screen and his heart was beating. And I was I sat there for a second confused. And then I looked over at everybody in the room's face and their eyes got big and they all jumped on him and started doing a lot more. They ushered me out of the room and I honestly, from that point on, it was a blur until I got into the PICU. I was waiting for them to transfer him up. And hindsight, I had started a mom's group years later. The nurse practitioner that was on the floor that day came in. I was telling people how I knew her. And I had barely remembered her. And she said, you don't understand how miraculous your son is and how it moved our whole, the whole medical, society where I live, because they had called her and they said, prep a bed. We have a very sick baby coming up. And they called her back and said, never mind, the baby's gone. And then they called her back and said, nope, the baby's alive again. You got to prep the bed. And so went in there. To me, everything was very surreal because I had never lived in this world. I didn't have any friend with a disability. I just had never experienced it and never experienced medical trauma. Everybody, the worst thing we had lived through was a broken arm.
Right.
And so when I just kept waiting for Wyatt to wake up. And so the first night they said he's not going to survive. Just the likelihood of him surviving the first night is very, very slim. And then he did. And then they said he won't make it 3 days. Very few kids do. And then he did. And then he started I kept asking, when are you going to take the coma medicine off? Because I understood they put him in a induced coma. And then I remember they're in this world all day, every day. And I'm the medical, the nurses, the doctors, the therapists, and them being confused by my question because they didn't understand because there was no more coma medicine in. He was just in a very minimally conscious state. And I didn't understand that. I didn't even know that was a thing,
Right.
So one by one, Wyatt began to defy the odds.
I don't know why I don't have Kleenex in the podcast closet by now.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Wow. What a miracle.
He is. He is. He's actually, a lot of people, like, their lives changed at that point because they felt like they saw God work for the first time. So it was
Oh, wow.
one of those things where God makes beauty out of ashes. You know, you're burnt down to nothing,
Yeah.
and something still comes from it.
Wow. Whew. Okay. So thank you. Thank you for going back there. Thank you for sharing that. And it's so hard not to personalize this as a mom. I'm like picturing one of my kids at that age and me going through it as well, and just how incredibly scary and horrific and devastating. And then all of a sudden, hope out of nowhere.
Mm-hmm.
So then what happened? Like, how long was he in the hospital, and then what?
Yeah, we were in the PICU for 52 days, and we eventually got to a point where we were waiting for him to stop storming. So that's where your heart rate's spiking to almost heart attack rates, your blood pressure spikes or drops really low, and your body is posturing in like a very unnatural way because it reminded me of somebody being electrocuted from the inside.
Oh,
His brain is storming. It's like trying to send signals out where there's pathways have been cut off
okay.
because he had oxygen deprivation. So his brain was, he had global brain damage. And so once we got the right medicine, which is actually, I haven't told anybody this story. There was a mom whose son had a rare medical heart condition. They had tested him for it, came out negative because the father had passed away from the same thing. A month later, this kid, it comes out of nowhere. His heart stops in the middle of school. And this is right before Wyatt's accident, like a month before.
Wow.
And this mother, who happened to be a nurse, said they were putting Wyatt on all these like Valium and like very little bits of morphine and like all these very heavy drugs, and nothing was stopping his storming, nothing.
Wow.
And she came up and said, I want to try gabapentin, which is a nerve blocker, which they use for pain, like back pain, stuff like that,
Right.
and a benzo. So like we put those together, and the moment we put those together, his storming stopped. And it was because she had gone through what she had gone through. And a nurse goes, you know what? This mom came up with this idea from her medical background, and it worked for her son. Can we try it on yours? And it was probably 2 months of us, or not 2 months, I'm sorry, like 4 weeks of us trying to stop storming. All day, every day, sweats, like posturing, just this, and not being conscious why it's happening, And the moment we gave those meds together, it all stopped. And then once his body regulated and we took him home, we were able to slowly wean him off both of those drugs, and his brain was no longer storming. But yeah, we were there 52 days, and we were waiting for him to be conscious enough and pass enough tests for us to take him from the hospital to Brooks Rehab, which is a rehabilitation center in Jacksonville, Florida. And I remember he had to prove that he could track, not super consistently, because he still, he tracks fine now, but like sometimes it's very slow. It depends on his day. But at the time, like he would go entire days and I wouldn't see if he saw me. And I remember it was the best. His physical therapist, who we still work with today, not in physical therapy sense, but like we do she's created cool things for kids like Wyatt. She had him upside down. We were just trying everything vestibular. So she had him on this pillow. He was 18 months, so he's little, upside down. And he couldn't smile at the time because he had palsy everywhere. So he had no expressions, and he just looked happy though, and when you like see someone's eyes and you're like, I can tell they're smiling. That's how he looked. And we had a balloon, and we saw this balloon go by, and we saw him see it, and that was all we needed to write in his medical chart, can track. And so that happened, and within a week we were at Brooks Rehab. They were great, but Wyatt was really in a minimally conscious state. They couldn't find a swallow. They couldn't get him to see anything. He had cortical vision impairment as a result and still has that. So his pupils were very dilated, couldn't handle the sun. He was being G-tube fed at the time and still
I was
is.
going to ask that. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. He was being G-tube fed, had a lot of spasticity. All of that was all new to me. We were trying to learn it. So basically we went there for a week. They kind of showed us how to care for him, sent us home with scripts and said, good luck.
You're like, wait, that's it? 1 week of training?
It was 1 week because they specialize in kids that are rehabilitating, and they didn't see Wyatt engaging in anything. And I don't think it was out of a lack of care. It just is like, this isn't for him now. And I mean, I was devastated at the time. I was like, no, keep him, because I knew that I had heard that they basically kick you out if you're not making progress. And because they have so many people that need to be seen. And he wasn't making progress at the time. But I came home and I was put in this place for this time because I knew doctors and therapists, and a very good friend at the time, she happened to be like a swallow expert. And so I was like, I think he's swallowing. I would do all these things they showed me in Brooks. And she came over and she just played with him because she's like, he's not my patient, so I'm just going to play. And she goes, no, that was a swallow. And so she sat there. I mean, it took 30 minutes for me to get him to do it, but she said, it's there. And so really embarked on this journey of like, okay, I'm going to own this. I'm going to own therapies. I'm going to own recovery. I'm going to own research, and just full steam ahead until I had a baby. And then I took like a week off. And then I remember putting Luke in his carrier and saying, Wyatt has to go to therapy. And he went with us everywhere. I stand by the statement to this day that he has the best fine motor skills because he's gone to OT since he was like born. So he is, his hand-eye coordination, everything's really advanced because of that. So.
Oh my gosh. How old is Luke today then? Is he 10?
Yep, 10. And he does have great hand-eye coordination.
That is crazy. Oh,
yeah.
Thanks for going along. It's the fifth child syndrome. Sorry, you have to go everywhere.
Yep. And we named him. So Wyatt's name is Warrior, and his middle name is Ace, which is top warrior. There actually is one translation, which Wyatt means warrior of water. And when I read that in the hospital, I like read that and I thought, I'm not this kid. The kid that's coming out is going to be like light breeze on a sunny day. That's going to be his name because I can't handle any more warriors. Like I need somebody to just be easy. And so we named him Luke Cooper, which means light in a barrel. And so he's just a joy. And he has a really unique relationship with Wyatt because he's only known Wyatt post-injury, where the other three knew Wyatt before. And so it's been a little harder, the journey for them. My oldest, he was like her baby. She was in first grade, so she carried him everywhere. He'd come and wake her up out of bed. And, that shifted. They all obviously still love Wyatt and spend a lot of time with him. But, it's different.
Did you see them go through their own grieving?
Yeah, especially when you're getting used to a G-tube, you can have a lot of vomiting. And he wasn't swallowing well, so it could lead to aspiration. It never did because we were very attentive. But yeah, they would get scared. That they were scared they could hurt him. They were scared that something could happen. He wasn't hugging them back or embracing anything because he was locked down. And so they still spent tons of time with him, kissed him, would read to him, sit with him. But I specifically remember my daughter really struggling, not with caring for him. She loved him so much that it was hard. And so.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you had this, supposedly normal life, and then you had this accident and this major, major shift, which then obviously affects your emotions, your perspectives, your daily routines. How did you adjust? What did you do internally? How did you and your husband, separate question, but how did you and your husband support each other during this? I mean, because you've got a lot of kids, you've got a lot going on. Like, were you like, we're high-fiving in the hallway? Like, we're just going to get through this acute crisis, which seemed to last for a very long time.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's go back to the original question. Sorry.
Yeah.
How are you doing, and how did you handle this?
I went into survival mode. I had a newborn. I had a child that needed me like a newborn. We did not have full-time nursing at the time. And so matter of fact, It wasn't until right before Luke was born that we said yes to nursing. So it was probably a month of nothing at nights because I was like, I don't need somebody to take care of my kid. This is my kid. But it's not normal. Even with a newborn, it's not normal to have to check heart rate to make sure your kid's breathing and to do those things, administer drugs in the middle of the night, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And so I just went to survival mode. I would cry a lot. Probably hindsight, I probably cried a whole bunch. But to me, I was suppressing a lot. Like it wasn't that I wouldn't talk about it, but I just couldn't go there because it was way too heavy. And I still wanted to be mom and I still wanted to do fun things. And I, wanted to show up at my kids' stuff, which I did. I kept showing up. But every time the feelings would come, they were so overwhelming. Like I would walk past a part of my house because at the time we were still in that same house and I would see him in the pool. I would envision that constantly. You can't help it. Like it's just when you have trauma, it stays in the front of your mind as if it just happened. So I was constantly catching my breath and then be like, no, it's not. And then going on. And so I started to actually, and I didn't learn this until much later with my counselor, that I would literally go like this. And I was actually telling my girlfriends this the other night as I was sharing that we were going to be doing this. And I said, oh yeah, you know what I remembered? And when I learned with my counselor is that I do this or I'll go like this. And I didn't know I physically did it. In my mind, I was saying, no, I don't have time for this. But they all said, oh yeah, you do that all the time. And I was like, you've seen me do that before? And they're like, Abby, you've always done that. Because they met me right around that time.
Right.
And I was like, oh my gosh, like I had no idea. I manifested it all the time. I thought it was in my head. I thought I was mentally doing this. So yeah, at the time, I don't think it was bad that I was suppressing because I needed to. I couldn't breathe. It was so heavy.
Yes.
But it was probably 3 or 4 years post-injury that I realized I was like, I think something's wrong. Like I've never been a person that wants to talk negatively all the time, although I would have moments because it just takes so much energy to stay there. But I started to sleep a lot. Like as soon as Brad came home, I'd be like, I'm going to go to bed. I'm tired. And then I'd wake up late. And he had a job that allowed for this at the time. So I'd sleep later. And it was a few months of that. And I was like, maybe I'm depressed. Is this, because I always envisioned depression much different. I envisioned acting sad, talking sad all the time. And I was like, oh no, I just don't want to be present. And so I realized that and went and found a few years later, I did some regular, like my own kind of seeking, did a mom's retreat on my own, just did some things that were helpful. But those images, those moments kept creeping up. And so I spoke to a girlfriend who's a counselor, and she had told me about EMDR, which is a technique for trauma. So I went to her and I said, I think I have anxiety. And she said, no, you have PTSD. Like you survived something that actually happened. It's not hypothetical. It's happening. It happened. And so she told me about EMDR. At the time, she wasn't trained in it. She was getting trained. And so she didn't want to obviously do something before she had completed her certification. But I came back about a year later and saw her colleague who was trained in it. And it was really, I appreciated it so much. And it really helped me integrate those things into my long-term memory instead of holding onto them, constantly dealing with them up front.
Wow. And in your story, you're really urging our audience to feel and not be afraid to feel. Yeah. What would you say to that? Because we're afraid to feel because I think we think it's going to take over and take us completely down, but yet suppressing it is also causing us problems.
Yeah. One of the things I learned, because I expressed to my counselor, I don't have time to cry all day. Like I have to live life. I have things to do. I want to help others. I want to be a good mom. I want to go to their functions and not be thinking like, if things were different, this would be different. And she said, you don't have to feel all day, every day. But when you're home and that thought comes to you, like when you're in a safe place and that thought comes to you, don't just push, don't do this. Sit with it for a minute, acknowledge it, even if you're not sure how to do it, just tell the feeling, like, it's okay that you're here. I see you. I acknowledge you. And just sit with it. Because then your body has time to process it instead of just suppressing. And then all of a sudden you're starting to get sick and you can't figure out why. Or you're sleeping and you're like, I don't know why I'm constantly wanting to sleep. Your body's going to handle it. It's going to do something with it. And it can be healthy or it can be unhealthy.
Right.
And so my biggest takeaway is once you're past that immediate need for survival, which there was a good season of that for me, that we had to survive, and my body did what it needed to do. My mind did what it needed to do to keep going. But once you're out of that, take time to feel, to process, to cry, to mourn, to acknowledge, to do some good breathing techniques, and then keep going.
And take us to today, Abby. How is Wyatt today? What is daily life like today?
So he has a global brain injury, but he's already surpassed everything that the doctors said he wasn't going to do. Not everything, but most, I should say. They said the part of his brain that controls emotion is gone. The part of his brain that thinks is gone. And that's just not true. He uses an eye gaze Tobii Dynavox to communicate. So he tracks with his eyes, it reads his retina, and he can speak that way. He's in 6th grade. He's very sassy and has a lot to say. He makes sarcastic remarks on his eye gaze. He makes jokes. He laughs. The first time I saw him laugh was after a hyperbaric oxygen dive, about 6 months post-injury, and he had palsy really bad. Now he smiles on both sides, but he had palsy really bad, and one side was a little stronger, but I didn't know that at the time. And he just grinned a little bit, and it was like the cutest little crooked smile I'd ever seen in my life. And it brought so much joy to know, okay, he feels, he understands. There's a university, and I think it's University of Texas, did a study on drowning survivors that had severe impairments as a result, and they have what is called locked-in syndrome. And so it means that they're really present, but the basal ganglia, the part that controls function of the body, is damaged. And so we talk to Wyatt like any other 12-year-old. He just turned 12. We expect from him. We expect him to communicate. I think having expectations for him is very important. We're always pressing forward. Yeah, he's in a wheelchair. He's a G-tube head. He's acquired a trach since then due to a surgery just to keep him from aspirating. So we're working towards getting him off those things. But right now it is where he is. And so that's where we support him. And I try to remind myself he's happy. And if he's happy, then if he has joy, then I can have joy. And I don't need to take from the what ifs because he's living in the now.
That's so good. I'm so touched by your story and your strength and your wisdom and your perspective, Abby. Let's shift to, you've become quite an advocate. You're known as Advocacy Abby on Instagram, and you have researched high and low and near and far, incredible resources. So let's tell our listeners all about that, please.
Yeah. So Advocacy Abby was birthed out of my best friend, Dawn, reaching out to me and saying, you need to do something with all this stuff you have. And so went on Instagram one day and I said, I'm going to do a 30 for 30. For 30 days, I'll say grants and we'll see if there's a need. Maybe there's not. And oh my goodness, was there a need? Therapists, parents, doctors started reaching out and saying, do you have a grant for equipment? Do you have a grant for treatment? Do you have a grant for travel? Do you have a grant for therapy? What about camps? My kid needs this. Can you help us fund it? And so out of that, I started posting frequently, like 4 to 5 times a week, different grants. And then I started coaching with companies that really wanted their clients to not have to pay out of pocket when insurance denied them. And so they hired me, and still to this day, I have companies do that. They'll hire me to come on and I'll consult them and work with their clients to help them find funding.
Wow.
And then in May, I met Support Now, which is a wonderful platform that does crowdsourcing, kind of like GoFundMe, meals, kind of like Meal Train, and updates. And they have this also option called Lend a Hand, where people can raise a hand to help with things like around the house, pick up the kids, take the dog out, take the trash. And I met them I fell in love with them immediately because I specialize in helping people fundraise as well. And they take less money. And all those platforms are on one. So it's free for their meal option. It's free for Linda Han. And the crowdsourcing part is a lower rate with no transaction fee. So I was like, well, this is a no-brainer. Like, I'm going to refer, when I help people fundraise, I'll refer them. And while I was talking to their CEO, Jordan, she's like, you have to meet our CTO. He has a vision of wanting to help families as well. And so we met. He said, what's your dream? And I said, I want to make this platform that could do what I do without me having to be present. I want to help millions instead of a few people a day. And he said, I can build it if you can fill it. And so we did. And we
Oh my
launched
God.
Connect. Isn't that great?
Ah,
It's so great when you find organizations that care for people.
yes.
And Support Now is one of those. And so we launched Connect July 18th, had
Mhm.
1,800 people sign up the first week. Currently
Whoa.
because it's 100% free for families. So we have a provider option that is a cost and it's a totally different option, but for families, it's 100% free. And so have over 1,200 grants on there and adding more every single day. And what really sets the platform apart from any kind of resource page is it's living and breathing. We have a whole team that reviews all the grants every month. It's searchable by your location and it's searchable by your diagnosis or situation. Because it's not only for disabilities, it's also for like cancer diagnosis, for medically complex kiddos, for survivors of car accidents and emergencies and things like that can
Mm.
also help pay for bills and therapy, housing, rent, all kinds of things.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. So how do people find it, Abby?
Yeah, so if you go to grants.supportnow.org or you go to the link in my bio on Instagram, it takes you right to Connect. And it's pretty simple. It'll ask you like 3 or 4 questions and then you'll have your free account up and running. We also send an email once a week if a new grant happens to come up and it fits your location and diagnosis, we alert you so that you can be one of the
Oh,
first.
that's fantastic.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Thank you so much. This is so needed, as you know, so needed. And I get so many messages and DMs about bills and, financial assistance. And that's just not what our organization does. And so I'm so excited to be able to send them your way.
Yeah, I'm so thankful for organizations like yours that does what I don't do, which is community and that sense of support from people that understand where you've been. So great synergy here.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Is there anything you haven't said about your journey, Abby, or about Wyatt or your family or about Support Now?
Yeah, so well, I don't think I answered your question about my husband. I
Oh,
want to go back to that.
yeah.
My husband and I, we both survived as well, and we both dealt with the trauma on our own. And it probably wasn't until the last few years that we started to recognize that. And we're both like type A, Enneagram 3, like go
Yeah.
getters, like, and so he was like really good about handling the medical bills and handling the medicine. And I did the therapies and treatment. We kind of tag team, but we realized after our 20-year anniversary was last year, we realized like it's going to be really important for us to designate time for each other. And it seems impossible, but that's where like organizations that are on my platform come in and help. There's like a mother's rest. So you can go get away for a
Mhm.
weekend and not spend a ton of money and just taking that time when you can. And it might only be once a year, but
Mhm.
having that time to remember like, oh, we like each other. We don't just love each other, but we actually like each other. There was a reason I
Mhm.
married him. and
Right.
and just remembering that when we're healthy, like everything else kind of falls in place. So um,
Mhm. And what would you say to parents out there listening who are like, okay, somehow you were able to get away. You have 5 kids, you have a child that requires a nurse. How are you able to step away without guilt and just logistics wise? Like you have made this happen. And we have to, nothing magical drops into our lap to give us a day, a weekend off. We have to make it happen for ourselves. But so tell our listeners how you've done that without all the obstacles that are there.
Yeah. Well, and just to reference, we were at the time, especially a working class family. So it wasn't like we had lots of money where we could be like, I'll pay for this babysitter to come for the weekend or any of that. We had family members that were willing to learn.
Wow.
One in particular, it did help us that she had a background in nursing, my
Mm-hmm.
mother-in-law,
Mm-hmm.
that was there a lot early on. But we also have taken upon ourselves to like, for little things, an hour or two here to teach friends.
Mm-hmm.
All of our kids know how to suction Wyatt. They know how to help Wyatt. Even the 10-year-old knows how to work a trach.
Mm-hmm.
Not that we ask them to do that, but we want
Right.
everybody to know just in case. And so
Yeah.
at first, honestly, it was 24 hours. We live in Florida, so we're an hour from the ocean. So we'd rent a little Airbnb that was cheap, a little hole in the wall, and stay at the beach for 24 hours. And it just felt so good.
Mm-hmm.
It was harder when he wasn't always doing great. It was hard, but it was still necessary,
Mm-hmm.
because we just and we never obviously we never left when he was like sick or something was
Right.
going on, but
Of course.
just learning gag reflex and things that would happen with him. But we had people that loved us enough that we eventually said yes to, and that was really hard because I even would be like to my husband, "You're not doing that right. You got to do it like this," so much less anyone else. Had therapists willing to come to the house. I mean, like we really asked a lot for those 24
Mm-hmm.
hours. Like they would come to the house. A nurse that used to work with him would check in, make sure he's okay. Like we asked a lot of things and called in a lot of favors.
I'm so proud of you, though. And that's such a great model for your friends, your family, this community, our audience. We have to ask for help.
Yes. That was something I learned really quick. I had to have. So I didn't ask it all the time because I didn't want to exhaust my options of asking someone. But once a year, like saying, "Hey, we're celebrating our anniversary. We really need a night. Could you just come for 5 hours?" So this is one of the things I would do. I'd ask my mother-in-law to come, and then I'd say, "Could you come for a couple hours so she can have a break while we're gone?" So she'd go to the grocery store, or go with the kids somewhere, the other kids somewhere. And they would say yes. And these were people that I knew would play with Wyatt and have fun with him and love on him, that I felt safe with. And so
Yeah.
it took a lot of inviting into my home and being willing to show people, which can be hard,
Mm-hmm.
because it's another task, another thing to do, but it's worth it.
It's so worth it. It's so
Mhm.
worth it. I'm so glad that you get that. And I'm so glad that you've created that for yourselves. It's so important. And it's so important to model it for all your kids.
Yeah. Yeah. We want them, we don't want our home to feel like a place we have to be. We want it to
Mm,
feel like a place we want to be. And so in order to do that, we have to get away sometimes.
that's a good word. That is quotable right there. Abby, where can everybody find you?
So the best place is on my website, advocacyabby.com. And then probably the most common place is Instagram with advocacy.abby.
Wonderful. We will link all of that, of course, in our show notes. So good to be with you. I'm so grateful to know you. I'm so grateful for the work that you do. And you have to come to a retreat sometime.
I would love to.
Thanks so much for listening today. Do us a favor and leave us a review and a rating so that this podcast can get into the ears and the hearts of more and more moms. Did you know that Brave Together Parenting Podcast is an extension of our nonprofit organization, We Are Brave Together? We Are Brave Together serves an international community of caregiving moms, offering support groups that are virtual and in-person, educational resources, and low-cost weekend retreats. And we have published our first anthology of caregiving stories entitled Becoming Brave Together, Heroic, Extraordinary Caregiving Stories from Mothers Hidden in Plain Sight. It will encourage and validate every parent caregiver. To join us today, go to wearebravetogether.org. Our support and sisterhood awaits you. Brave Together Parenting Podcast is for entertainment and education purposes only. It's not a substitute for professional care and should not be relied on for medical or mental health advice. The use of any content on our podcast, links, show notes, or on our website is to be done at your own personal risk. please seek out a professional to assess your own medical or mental health concerns, because we are all beautifully complex and the content of this podcast is for a broad audience.